My father left me an empire built on promises, but all I had left was a ghost and a single blinking red cursor, the digital heartbeat of a dead dream. For 72 hours, that cursor mocked me from the abyss of 1,000 black screens. It was the only sign of life in the digital mausoleum that was once Vance Legacy Systems, and it pulsed with a rhythm that felt like it was counting down the final seconds of my life. I'm Elara Vance, and at 32 years old, I was the reluctant queen of a fallen kingdom, a fraud sitting on a throne I never wanted, built by a man I could never live up to. The world knew him as Alistair Vance, the visionary. I just knew him as Dad, the man who loved code more than he loved sleep, the man who died behind the wheel of his car on a rainy Tuesday, leaving me with a company that felt more like a monument to his absence than a business. Now, his monument was crumbling. The silence in the boardroom was heavier than the unbreathable, recycled air. It was a weighted silence, thick with accusation and the metallic scent of fear. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the city glittered, oblivious. Inside, my world was ending. 3 days. 3 days since the cascade, as the media had so dramatically dubbed it. One moment, Vance Legacy was the invisible backbone of global finance, healthcare, and logistics. The next, it was a digital graveyard. Every transaction, every piece of data, every line of communication, frozen solid. The financial hemorrhage was biblical. $500 million a day. But the numbers were just abstract horrors. The real horror was in the details. The frantic calls from hospital administrators whose patient records were locked. The desperate emails from small business owners who couldn't make payroll. The faces of my 3,000 employees who looked at me with a terrifying mixture of hope and panic. They were all depending on me, the art history major who spent her college years trying to run as far away from her father's world as possible. The experts I'd hired were supposed to be my salvation. They were the high priests of Silicon Valley, men and women whose hourly rates were more than my first car. They sat around the massive obsidian table, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of their laptops, looking like a council of defeated gods. Dr. Eris Thorne, a man with a jawline as sharp as his MIT credentials, had lost his confident swagger. His initial proclamations of a standard kernel panic had devolved into muttered curses at code he couldn't crack. Beside him, Lena Petrova, a cybersecurity legend who had supposedly once hacked a satellite with a modified gaming console, just stared blankly at a screen full of diagnostic gibberish. They were the best, the brightest, the most expensive, and they were utterly useless. They were failing, and in doing so, they were holding up a mirror to my own failure. My father had built this company on pure, unadulterated genius. I was trying to save it with a checkbook. The irony was suffocating. I had spent the last 5 years since his death trying to prove I was worthy of his name. I'd worked 18-hour days, learned the language of servers and syntax until it filled my dreams, and adopted a cold, ruthless corporate persona that was a size too big for my soul. I'd cut ties with anyone who reminded me of the past, of the time before I was CEO Elara Vance, when I was just Ellie, a girl who missed her dad. That included Ben Carter, my father's co-founder and best friend, the man who had been my uncle in every way that mattered. After the funeral, in a grief-fueled haze of paranoia, I'd convinced myself he was trying to steal the company. I saw his quiet condolences as manipulative ploys, his offers to help as power grabs. I'd orchestrated a brutal clinical buyout, pushing him out of the company he helped build with a severance package that was both insultingly large and emotionally devastating. I had told myself it was a necessary business decision, a clean break. The truth was, I couldn't stand to look at him, because every time I did, I saw my father's ghost reflected in his kind, sad eyes. I hadn't spoken to him in 5 years. Now, as the world burned around me, the ghosts were all I had left. The boardroom door hissed open, and a man from facilities wheeled in a coffee cart. I didn't look up, too absorbed in my own impending doom. A board member, a vulture named Richard Sterling, cleared his throat. "Elara," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We need to discuss the liquidation protocol. The investors are demanding a Plan B." The word liquidation struck me with physical force. It meant selling my father's dream for parts. It meant admitting defeat. My hands trembled under the table. I was about to answer, to project a confidence I hadn't felt in years, when a small, quiet voice cut through the tension. "It's not a corruption cascade." Every head turned. Standing near the coffee cart was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 10, with a shock of messy brown hair and glasses that were slightly too big for his face. He was looking at the main diagnostic screen, the one displaying the endless, scrolling lines of red error text that had baffled the world's greatest minds. Beside him, a man in a simple blue polo shirt, the facility's uniform, looked utterly mortified. It was Ben, and the boy, his son, Leo. My heart stopped. Of all the people in all the world, it had to be him. Ben wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked older, tired. The easy laugh lines around his eyes had been replaced by the fine print of worry. He put a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture that was both protective and apologetic. "Leo, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "These people are working. We're just here to check the server room's climate control." Richard Sterling let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Ben Carter? I'll be damned. I thought you'd retired to some tropical island. And what is this? Bring your child to watch the world burn day?" The condescension was a physical thing, a poison in the air. I felt a flush of shame so hot it was dizzying. I had done this to him. I had reduced this brilliant, gentle man, my father's creative partner, to a handyman, pushing a coffee cart, forced to bring his son to work. My carefully constructed corporate armor cracked, and for a moment I was just Ellie again, a little girl who had broken something precious and didn't know how to fix it. Leo, however, seemed completely unfazed. He ignored Sterling and pointed a small, determined finger at the screen. "It's not random," he insisted, his voice clear and certain. "It looks like chaos, but it's not. See, the errors repeat in a Fibonacci sequence. It's not a crash, it's a message." The room, filled with certified geniuses, went utterly silent. They stared at the boy, then at the screen, their expressions shifting from dismissal to disbelief, and then to a dawning, terrifying understanding. A 10-year-old boy had just seen something they had all missed. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my only chance at salvation had just walked in, wearing a faded NASA t-shirt. And he was the son of the man whose life I had ruined. The silence that followed Leo's declaration was a living entity. It pressed in on us, heavy with the weight of shattered egos, and the uncomfortable possibility that we were all fools. Dr. Thorne was the first to break, his skepticism warring with the flicker of professional curiosity. He strode to the main screen, his expensive suit looking suddenly out of place. He squinted, tracing the cascading errors with his finger, his lips moving as he silently counted. After a moment, his face went pale. "My God," he whispered, the sound barely audible. "He's right." He turned to look at Leo, not as a child, but as a peer. How could you possibly see that?" Leo shrugged, a small, nervous gesture that seemed at odds with the bombshell he had just dropped. My dad taught me to look for patterns in everything," he said, glancing up at Ben. "He said that most code isn't just logic, it's a form of poetry. It has rhythm." Ben looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He was staring at me, and for the first time in 5 years our eyes met. The accusation in his gaze was gone, replaced by something far more painful, a deep, profound sorrow. He wasn't just here to fix an air conditioner. I realized with a jolt of sickening clarity that he had probably taken this low-level tech job just to be close to the company he had helped create, to watch over his friend's legacy from the sidelines. And I had been too proud, too blind to even notice. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The high-priced consultants who moments before had been ready to pronounce my company dead now gathered around a 10-year-old boy, their faces a mixture of awe and humiliation. Lena Petrova pulled up a new diagnostic window. "If it's a sequence, a deliberate pattern," she mused, her fingers flying across her keyboard, "then it's not a hardware failure, it's an attack. A very, very sophisticated one." The word attack hung in the air, changing everything. This wasn't an accident. It was an assassination. Someone had deliberately targeted Vance legacy systems. Someone had planted this digital poison deep within my father's creation. The thought was both terrifying and, in a strange way, clarifying. I was no longer fighting a ghost of technical incompetence. I was fighting a person, an enemy. "Leo," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "can you find the source of the message?" I was asking a child for help while a room full of experts looked on, but I didn't care. He was the only one speaking a language that made sense. Leo nodded, his earlier nervousness replaced by a quiet focus. He looked at Ben, who gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of permission. It was a silent conversation between father and son, a transfer of trust that I could only watch with a hollow ache in my chest. Ben wheeled over a spare terminal, and Leo clambered onto the chair, his feet dangling a good 6 inches from the floor. The keyboard was almost as wide as his shoulders. As his small fingers began to move, a hush fell over the room. He didn't type with the frantic, percussive energy of the other experts. His movements were fluid, economical, and impossibly fast. He wasn't just typing commands. He was having a conversation with the machine. Windows of code opened and closed. He navigated through firewalls and security protocols that had stumped Lena Petrova for 3 days. He was moving through the wreckage of my system, not like a salvager, but like an architect, walking through a house he knew intimately. "It's buried in the foundation code," he announced after a few minutes, not looking up from the screen. "The old stuff. The code your dad wrote himself, years ago." He pointed to a line. "Right there." Dr. Thorne leaned in. "That's just a temporal signature, a timestamp function. It's benign." "It's supposed to be," Leo corrected him gently, "but someone weaponized it. They inserted a logic bomb inside the timestamp's syntax, a single character, a semicolon instead of a colon. It was designed to stay dormant until the system's processing load hit a specific, impossibly high threshold, a threshold we wouldn't hit for years." A cold dread washed over me as I understood. The recent global expansion I had pushed for, the one I had been so proud of, the one that was supposed to cement my legacy, I had triggered the bomb myself. My ambition had been the trigger for my own destruction. "The cascade wasn't the attack," Leo continued, his voice low and serious. "It was a distraction, a smokescreen, while everyone was trying to fix the crash." His fingers moved again, pulling up another window. This one showed network traffic logs. My blood ran cold. While we had been paralyzed, data had been flowing out of our servers. Gigabytes of it, terabytes, customer data, proprietary algorithms, financial projections, research and development, the very soul of the company. It was being stolen, siphoned off into the dark. "They're still in the system," Leo said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They're still downloading." Right now, as if on cue, new alerts began to flash on the main screen. These weren't the rhythmic, patterned errors from before. These were aggressive, chaotic. Alarms blared. File directories began to vanish in real time. The thief knew they'd been spotted. They were no longer trying to be subtle. They were smashing and grabbing, and on their way out, they were starting to burn the whole house down.
"They're initiating a system-wide wipe,"
Lena Petrova shouted, rushing back to her own terminal.
"They're deleting the backups."
The room exploded into controlled panic. The experts who had been humbled into silence were now galvanized by a clear and present danger. But their frantic typing was useless. For every security hole they tried to patch, the attacker opened 3 more. It was like trying to scoop water out of a sinking ship with a teaspoon. I stood frozen, watching the digital lifeblood of my father's company drain away. This was it. The end. We were seconds away from total, irreversible data annihilation. But then I looked at Leo. He wasn't panicked. He was angry. His small face was set with a look of fierce determination. He was typing faster than ever, his expression a mask of concentration. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice a breath I didn't know I was holding. "He thinks he's smarter than my dad," Leo said, his eyes never leaving the screen. "But my dad always built a secret door." He hit the enter key with a definitive click. For a second, nothing happened. The data wipe continued. The alarm still screamed. Then, one by one, the black screens around the room flickered. A single line of simple white text appeared on every monitor. It was a question. "Initialize Ghost Protocol, YN." Dr. Thorne stared, his mouth agape. "Ghost Protocol? That's a theoretical concept."
A fail-safe system that exists on a completely separate, air-gapped network, capable of overwriting and restoring an entire system from a pristine state.
It's never been successfully implemented. Leo looked up from his keyboard and, for the first time, he smiled. It was a small, triumphant smile. "My dad implemented it," he said simply. "He just never told anyone but me." The question hung on 1,000 screens, a silent challenge in a room filled with the noise of impending disaster. Internalize Ghost Protocol? YN. It felt less like a computer prompt and more like a question from my father himself, reaching out from beyond the grave. For 5 years I had tried to run his company my way, with my people, my strategies. I had systematically erased the old guard, the people like Ben, convinced that my modern, Harvard-educated approach was superior to their garage-born ingenuity. Now my entire empire, my future, and my father's legacy all came down to a secret he had shared not with me, his daughter and successor, but with a 10-year-old boy. The humiliation was a sharp, bitter pill, but it was quickly overshadowed by a desperate, flickering hope. I looked at Leo, this small child who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his narrow shoulders with an impossible calm. Then I looked at his father. Ben was standing behind him, a hand resting gently on his son's chair, his eyes fixed on the screen with a mixture of pride and profound sadness. He knew. He had known all along about this secret door and had watched me flail and fail without saying a word. "Do it," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the chaos. I wasn't talking to Leo. I was talking to my father's ghost, to the memory of Ben, to the part of myself I had buried long ago. It was an act of surrender. I was finally admitting that I couldn't do it alone, that I didn't have all the answers. Leo's finger hovered over the Y key. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. He was giving me the choice, giving me back a sliver of the control I had so spectacularly lost. I nodded, a single sharp gesture. He pressed the key. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Every screen in the building, including the attacker's frantic deletion commands and our own team's failing countermeasures, was wiped clean. For a heart-stopping second, there was only blackness and the sound of our own breathing.
Then the screens flooded with a brilliant, calming blue. In the center, the Vance Legacy Systems logo materialized. Not the cold corporate version I had commissioned, but the original one my father and Ben had sketched on a napkin decades ago. Below it, lines of code began to scroll, but these were not errors. It was a system restore, executing at an impossible speed. "What's happening?" Richard Sterling stammered, his face a mask of confusion. Ben finally spoke, his voice quiet but resonant in the suddenly silent room. "Alistair always believed in a safety net. The Ghost Protocol is a complete, incorruptible mirror of the entire system, updated in real time but completely isolated from the main network. It's not a backup, it's a phantom limb. The moment Leo initiated it, the live system was severed and the ghost system was grafted in its place. Everything the attacker did in the last 72 hours, it's gone, wiped from existence as if it never happened." The implications were staggering. We hadn't just recovered the data. We had effectively turned back time. The relief was so overwhelming it felt like a physical blow. I leaned against the table, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Tears I didn't know I'd been holding back began to stream down my face. I was crying from relief, from exhaustion, from the shame of my own arrogance, and from a sudden, crushing wave of grief for the father I had never truly understood. But Leo wasn't celebrating. His face was still locked in concentration, his eyes scanning the newly restored system logs. "He's gone," he said, but he left a trail. While the rest of us were reeling from the near-death experience, Leo was still on the hunt. The Ghost Protocol had not only restored the system, it had also captured a perfect snapshot of the attacker's presence within it, like a fly trapped in amber. Before the attacker was severed, their connection protocols, their IP addresses, their entire digital signature was captured. It was all there. They were routed through a series of proxy servers in Eastern Europe. Lena Petrova said, her voice filled with a newfound respect as she read over Leo's shoulder. "But the origin signal, it's local. Very local." Leo's fingers danced across the keyboard again, peeling back the layers of digital obfuscation. "It's coming from inside the building," he said, his voice dropping. A collective gasp went through the room. The enemy wasn't in some far-off country. They were here, among us. My mind raced, cycling through the faces of my executive team, my board members. Who would betray me like this? Who hated me enough to orchestrate such a complete and utter destruction? Leo wasn't finished. He cross-referenced the attacker's digital signature with the building's internal security network logs, access card swipes, terminal logins, Wi-Fi connections. A file appeared on the screen. It was an employee profile, and I felt the last bit of air leave my lungs. The face, staring back at me from the screen, was not some shadowy hacker. It was Julian Croft, my head of cybersecurity, the man I had entrusted with the keys to my entire kingdom, the man I had promoted just 6 months ago, who sat in meetings with me every day, whose kids I'd asked about. He had been sitting in his office just 2 floors below us, methodically dismembering the company while feigning concern and helplessness to my face. The betrayal was so profound, so personal, it eclipsed everything else. It wasn't about money or a corporate takeover. This was intimate. He hadn't just tried to kill my company. He had tried to kill my father's memory, using the very systems I had trusted him to protect. As security moved to apprehend him, a new message flashed on Leo's screen. It wasn't an attack. It was a direct communication from Julian, sent in his final, desperate moments before his connection was severed. A single line of text that made my blood run cold. He always said you weren't worthy of it. I was just proving him right. He, my father, The words were a poisoned arrow, aimed at the deepest, most insecure part of my soul. The fear that had haunted me for 5 years, that I was a disappointment, an imposter who could never measure up. Julian hadn't just used my own ambition against me. He had weaponized my deepest insecurity. He had turned my father's legacy into a tool to validate my own worst fears about myself. The system was saved, but I felt more broken than ever. And as I looked at Ben and Leo, the two people who truly understood my father's genius, I realized the real restoration project wasn't the company's code. It was my own. The aftermath was a blur of flashing lights, stern-faced FBI agents, and the quiet, efficient hum of a company coming back to life. Julian Croft was led away in handcuffs, his face a passive mask that betrayed nothing of the catastrophic damage he had tried to inflict. His confession was swift and chilling. He spoke of years of resentment, of feeling overlooked by my father, and then by me. He saw the company as his birthright, and my inheritance of it as a cosmic injustice. The message he sent me wasn't just a final act of cruelty. It was the core of his warped philosophy. He truly believed he was carrying out my father's unspoken will, a belief he had nurtured in the dark corners of his ego for years. The authorities hailed it as the largest averted corporate disaster in history. The media spun tales of a mysterious, heroic hacker. My board, led by a sheepish Richard Sterling, offered me their unanimous, unwavering support. They were all celebrating a victory, but I felt hollowed out, a ghost in my own life. While the world outside moved on, my world had shrunk to the 4 glass walls of that conference room. The experts had packed up their equipment, their exorbitant fees waived in the face of their own obsolescence. It was just the 3 of us left, me, Ben, and Leo. The billion-dollar corporation hummed along silently around us, saved and secured, but the silence between us was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Leo was asleep in one of the large leather chairs, his head pillowed on his arm, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. He looked so fragile, so utterly ordinary, it was hard to reconcile him with the digital warrior who had just saved all our lives. Ben stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, his back to me. The space between us felt like a canyon carved by 5 years of my own pride and fear. "Ben?" I started, my voice cracking. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" felt like a pebble tossed into that canyon, too small to ever reach the other side. He turned, and the exhaustion on his face was bone deep. "He loved you, Ellie," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Your father. He was so incredibly proud of you. He was just terrible at showing it. All he knew was code. It was his love language. All of this," he swept his arm, indicating the entire company, "this was all for you." The words undid me. The cold corporate shell I had built around myself for 5 years shattered into a million pieces. The tears came again, hot and heavy, not just for the company, but for the lost years, for the misunderstandings, for the father I had mourned but never truly known. I had spent so long trying to earn the respect of a ghost, I had pushed away the one person who could have helped me understand him. He told me about the ghost protocol a week before he died. Ben continued, his voice soft. He was worried. Worried about the company growing too big too fast. Worried about you. He said if anything ever happens, if Ellie ever gets in over her head, Ben, you have to be there. She won't ask for help. She's too much like me. So you have to be her ghost, her safety net. My breath hitched. It wasn't a secret he kept from me. It was a gift he left for me, entrusted to the one person he knew would never abandon me, even when I had abandoned him. I had seen Ben's presence as a threat, a judgment, but he wasn't haunting me. He was honoring a promise. He had taken that menial job not just to be near the company, but to be my invisible guardian, my father's last line of defense. And I had looked right through him. I finally found the words. "I'm so sorry, Ben. For everything. I was lost, I was scared, and I turned that fear into anger. I pushed you away because you were the last piece of him I had left, and it hurt too much to look at you." He walked over and finally, after 5 long years, he pulled me into a hug. It felt like coming home. I wept into his shoulder, mourning everything I had lost and everything I had almost thrown away. When I finally pulled back, I looked at the sleeping boy in the chair. "Leo," I said, my voice filled with an awe that I knew would never fade. He's a miracle." Ben smiled, a true warm smile that reached his tired eyes. "He's Alistair's godson," he said simply. "Your dad started teaching him code when he was 5. He said Leo had the gift, the ability to see the poetry, not just the math. He saw the same spark in Leo that he saw in himself." In that moment, everything clicked into place. The legacy wasn't the code, or the servers, or the stock price. It was the spark. It was the passion, the creativity, the relentless drive to build and to protect. My father hadn't just left me a company. He had left me a family I had been too blind to see. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting. I walked in not as the frightened imposter, but as Elara Vance's daughter. I announced the creation of a new position, Chief Innovation Officer, a role that had been vacant since Ben was forced out. I offered it to him, right there in front of everyone. There were murmurs and shocked looks, but I didn't care. Then, I announced the formation of a new cybersecurity division, an ethical hacking unit, to be run by the most brilliant mind I had ever encountered. I created a trust, an educational fund that would pay for Leo's entire education, all the way through whatever PhD program he wanted, and a salaried consultancy position that he could begin whenever he felt ready. Vance Legacy Systems wasn't just my company anymore, it was ours. We would rebuild my father's dream, not as a cold corporate monument, but as a living, breathing legacy of family, forgiveness, and the kind of genius that can't be taught in a classroom. My story isn't really about a computer crash. It's about the walls we build around our hearts and the unexpected people who show us how to tear them down. It's about realizing that the deepest wounds often come from the people we love, but that their love is also the only thing that can truly heal us. Have you ever let pride or fear push someone away, only to realize later that they were the one person you needed most? It's a painful lesson, but it's one that can lead to the most beautiful kinds of restoration. If you've ever felt lost in a legacy you didn't choose, or if you've ever found salvation in an unexpected place, please share your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and they remind us that we're all just trying to find our way back home. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because every story of redemption is worth sharing.